Today we're going to cover how you can turn your organic materials like kitchen scraps and yard waste into nutrient-rich soil with your compost bin. When you use your new compost bin, you are making a difference in your community by reducing your reliance on the landfill and creating a new sustainable resource. Takeaway number 1, storing your food scraps in your house. I use a stainless steel canister with a charcoal filter to help absorb the smell. I've heard people store their scraps in a Tupperware in the freezer to keep out any bugs. Others say they reuse an old coffee container. Do what works best for you and your budget. Takeaway 2, these are the do's and don'ts of composting. Any fruits and vegetables are okay, as well as tea bags, coffee grounds, and eggshells. Meat and dairy products can become problematic because they might attract wildlife and other insects that you don't want to visit your yard. When you're sauteing your vegetables in olive oil and other fats, avoid adding those to the bin as well. When it comes to yard waste, you can compost your grass clippings, branches, leaves, and flowers. Some yard waste to avoid putting in your bin are things like grass trimmings that have been treated with chemicals, diseased or invasive plants, and weeds with seeds, as you could spread that weed once your compost has been added to the soil. It's good practice to consider how you will be using your compost afterwards. If you're going to be adding it to your garden beds, then you need to be cautious about adding chemicals and weeds that might harm the health of your fruits and vegetables you're working so hard to grow. On the other hand, if you are just spreading the compost as topsoil to your lawn, it's not as big of a deal if some weed seeds and lawn chemicals make their way back to the lawn. Takeaway number 3, green and brown ratio balance. The greens are your nitrogen sources, and they are critical to promoting healthy microbes such as bacteria and fungi that aid in the decomposition process. The greens are typically food scraps and yard waste that are wet, such as fruit and veggie scraps, coffee grounds, tea bags, and grass clippings. Remember, just because it's classified as a green material doesn't necessarily mean it's green. Browns are the carbon-rich materials that are typically dry. So things like dry leaves, straw, egg cartons, shredded cardboard, shredded paper, and wood chips. In general, the smaller the materials, the faster they will decompose. So it's a good idea to shred your carbon sources to ensure there are lots of pockets of air flowing throughout the bin. If you don't have enough carbon in the bin, you'll have a wet pile that likely stinks and doesn't break down. You always want to have more carbon to nitrogen in your bin. The recommendations are 70% carbon to 30% nitrogen per volume. Many people get fixated on how to maintain the proper balance of carbon to nitrogen. It's really not an exact science. Every time you add fresh, wet nitrogen scraps to your bin, add a healthy layer of carbon on the top. This helps to prevent flies and odors due to exposed foods. Here's a pro tip. I stockpile my leaves in the fall, so I have carbon sources handy all year round. The contents of your compost should be as moist as a wrung-out sponge. If you see the contents are really dried out, sprinkle some water into the bin with a garden water canister. Too much moisture and you will have a stinky, soupy mess. You will need to turn the contents inside the bin at least once a week to allow proper airflow. You can use a garden shovel, pitchfork, or even your hands to aerate the pile. They also make a lot of fancy aerator gadgets, such as this plunger tool. Takeaway number 4, patience is key. If you're composting during the warmer months, it might take a few months before you have finished compost. If you're composting during the winter months, it could take up to 6 months before it's ready. Don't get discouraged. So how do you know when your compost is ready? Well, open your harvest door and take a whiff. It should smell earthy, woody, and be relatively fluffy and look like soil. If you have any questions about how to use your compost bin, SWACO staff are here to help. Email us at outreach@swaco.org. For more information on how to make a difference, visit savemorethanfood.org. Now sit back, relax, and watch your organic waste turn into nutrient-rich soil.